A Labour victory in the Newsround election, but only just. Stand by for your region's results as we key into the very latest computer technology. Hello and welcome to Newsround Election Special, where the news is that Labour have just pipped the Conservatives with a huge surge of support for the Liberal Democrats. Around 500,000 children in 1,500 schools cast their vote nationwide in the world's biggest ever mock election for young people, organised with the help of the Hansard Society for Parliamentary Government. Now, in a moment, we'll be going over to Peter Snow in the General Election Studio to see how your votes would change the face of the country.
And joining me to give their first reaction to the results will be four top politicians representing the Conservatives, Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens.
Well, all that coming up, but first let's take a look in more detail at exactly how you voted. The total number of votes cast for the Labour Party, 116,875. The Conservatives got 110,868 votes. The Liberal Democrats, 92,551 votes. The Green Party won 51,513 votes. The Scottish National Party, 13,747 votes. And in Wales, Plaid Cymru got 3,368 votes. Our results covered 588 constituencies. But using a scientific computer forecast, we can show how many seats the parties would have got across all 651 constituencies. Neil Kinnock's Labour Party in red would have 236 seats. The blue shows seats that would be held by John Major's Conservative Party. And Paddy Ashdown's Liberal Democrats in yellow would have 112 seats. The other parties, like the Greens and the SNP, would have 113 seats between them. Now, to find out what your votes would mean if this was the real election, we link up with Peter Snow in the General Election Studio. Peter.
Juliet, this would be the most remarkable parliament and one of the most indecisive parliaments in British electoral history. Let's go inside the chamber of the House of Commons. There's the Speaker's chair, government benches over here, opposition benches over here, and see just how many MPs there would be for each of the parties. John Major's Conservatives, 190, down from 370 in the last parliament. Beside him, Paddy Ashdown's Liberal Democrats on the incredible total of 112, only 22 in the last parliament. Beside them, the others, the Greens, the Scottish National Party, its biggest ever, 39 MPs in Scotland, the Scottish National Party, 113 of the others altogether, making a total for the opposition parties of 415. Now, here are the government benches. There's the 326 that any party needs to be solidly in government with an outright majority. Would Neil Kinnock's red Labour MPs make it through the winning post? No, not by a long way, 236 altogether. They'd be short by 90 of an overall majority. It would be a hung parliament, an indecisive parliament, with no party in overall majority.
Well, in that case, Peter, who would rule the country?
Well, John Major would still be Prime Minister. He could try and form a government, but he'd be terribly hard-pressed with that number of Conservative MPs. Almost certainly, Neil Kinnock would be asked by the Queen to try and form a new government. He could try and soldier on, he could try and hope that the opposition wouldn't unite to defeat him on the Queen's speech and further legislation, but almost certainly he would approach Paddy Ashdown's Liberal Democrats. 112 of them, and he would say to them, look, why don't you join me in a governing coalition, Liberal Democrats and Labour together, come over and join me on the government benches. There they would be then, the Liberal Democrats under Paddy Ashdown, Neil Kinnock, Prime Minister, 348 of them altogether, and that would make that Labour-Liberal Democrat coalition have a majority of 45, which would put them clearly through the winning post and would give them an outright majority. Neil Kinnock might even make Paddy Ashdown Foreign Secretary. Juliet.
Thanks, Peter. Well, of course, people under 18 can't vote next Thursday in the real election, but the results already caused a great deal of interest among politicians. And Krishnan's with some of those bidding for power right now.
Well, with me now are the representatives of the main parties. We will be coming back to them for a more detailed chat later on, but first of all, Tony Blair. It's a good result for the Labour Party, but you can't form a government without the Liberal Democrats. What happens now?
Well, taken together with the Radio 1 poll, it shows far more support for Labour than any other party, and that's because our policies on the environment and education, overseas aid, and of course employment, attract large numbers of young people.
Angela Rumbold, this is a bit of a disaster for your party. What are you going to be doing about it?
I don't think it's a disaster at all. I think it's a good result, because when you look at the number of different parties that people were able to vote for and the reality in the election on Thursday, the 9th of April, you will see that the choice will narrow down, and many of the people who were voted for by your voters will have to come to a rather more concise conclusion about who they're going to vote for, and I think they will be voting for the Conservative Party, the party with the best policies for governing the country next time.
Des Wilson, the Daily Mail today, who printed all our results, have called this a three-way split. Is this the beginning of a new type of politics in Britain, with the Liberal Democrats featuring very highly?
Well, I hope so. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the young people who voted Liberal Democrat. I find it extremely encouraging, because I think they realise that we're the one party talking about their future, about education, about making sure there's an economy that will give them work when they grow up, about their environment, and I find it a really good result.
Jean Lambert, your votes have been quite critical in this election. Do you think this is going to be reflected in the national poll at all?
Well, I would certainly hope so. I mean, it's always a pleasure for Greens to win seats, and I notice, however, once again, when you look at the proportionality of this, it raises some very interesting issues about our whole democracy, which a parliament like this will spend a lot of time debating.
We will come back to you all later on, but for now, back to Juliet.
Now, a quick look back at the build-up to polling in the Newsround election. It was full of all the excitement of the real thing, from the campaign trail to the polling booth and the final declaration of results, as Newsround's Paul Welsh now reports.
For 3 frantic weeks, young politicians have been campaigning for support in schools all around Britain. Voters have been collared whenever possible, wherever possible. Nowhere's been safe from the politicians. Even dinner time was fair game.
So I'm sorry, Conservative or Liberal here, but even the Labour MP is only 2,500 votes behind in a 30,000 vote constituency.
The Newsround election on the road reporting team travelled 1,000 miles, the length and breadth of the country, covering the campaigns and the issues in Britain's schools.
I've been driving in my car. I've been driving in my car.
In classrooms and assembly halls everywhere, the candidates hoping to be elected stood their ground as voters questioned them about the speeches they'd made and the plans they have for Britain.
Why do you think we should just go to school 2 days a week? Because we'd hardly learn anything.
After we said that in Assembly, we had a meeting with all the rest of the loonies from the party, and we decided 4 days a week, because then it's not 5, but 2 you'd hardly learn anything, and that's what we thought as well.
The Conservatives are Labour, not Labour.
Some of the debates were more lively than others.
The Labour government that was in last time made an absolute mess of the economy.
That is not true. Each time the Conservatives have got into government, they've inherited the basic system.
Thank you, William.
I want to be elected. I've got to get the vote. And I told you about school. I want to be elected.
Oh, go on, I'm going to. I'm the nice one in the tweed jacket. Well, it was a present, actually.
Wanna be selected.
It wasn't just the Newsround election on the road reporting team who were interested in the election campaign in schools. Teams from other national television programmes and from national radio turned out too, to question the young candidates about the election and to find out what sort of plans young people have for their country. And it didn't end there.
And welcome to Boroughmuir News. Here we are for another heated political debate at lunchtime.
Some students did TV reports to show in school. Others made adverts for their parties.
We think these bins are a bit impractical. So, because the crows throw the rubbish everywhere. So, one of our policies is to get side opening bins. So the crows don't throw the bins, the rubbish everywhere.
Candidates everywhere have all been after the same thing, your vote. And each of the votes cast helped to make this what's reckoned to be the biggest children's election the world has ever seen.
As a returning officer for Greenbury Primary School, I hereby declare that the Green Party has won Greenbury's election.
Brilliant stuff. And now, with the help of our giant video wall, we can link up the whole of Britain and take a closer look at how you voted in different parts of the country. We start in the southwest. For Newsround Election Special, Phil Fairclough reports.
The Liberal Democrats have always said that if they were going to make a big breakthrough against the Conservative and Labour parties, it would be here in the southwest. And in the Newsround election, they finally succeeded. Pushing the Conservatives into second place and Labour into third, it's a Lib Dem dream, taking 34% of the vote, the Greens scraping into fourth place. Changing the results into seats gives the Liberal Democrats twice as many as the Tories in the southwest, with the Labour Party and the Greens battling neck and neck for what's left.
For our next regional report, we go to Wales, where Maria David's waiting to tell us what happened there. Maria.
Although there's been a lot of talk in Wales about moving towards complete self-rule, that hasn't been reflected in our election. Instead, the Labour Party's come out on top, perhaps due to worries about unemployment and the economy. With 33% of the vote, Labour have romped home. The Conservatives and Liberal Democrats are tied in second place, pushing the Nationalists' Plaid Cymru into fourth. So, in terms of seats, Labour have a huge majority, with the other parties fighting it out for what's left at the bottom of the pile.
Next, we go to George Eakin, who's in Northern Ireland.
Here in Northern Ireland, the election is inevitably dominated by the issues of continuing violence and the political future of the province. You can't vote Labour or Liberal Democrat here, but for the first time, some people will be able to vote Conservative. Many Newsround voters decided to place their votes with the Conservatives, helping to push the others' share of the poll to the top. The Tories, in fact, got enough support to take 3 seats in the region. The rest were shared by several different parties, representing the wide range of political views that exist in Northern Ireland.
Well, we go right up north now to Joanna Robinson, who's in Edinburgh in Scotland.
At the last general election, Labour won most of the seats here. But since then, there's been a surge in support for the Scottish National Party, who want Scotland to break away from the rest of the United Kingdom and become a completely separate country.
In the Newsround election, the SNP swept to victory, winning 32%, a third of the votes. Labour were well behind, followed by the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. Our results mean that out of a total of 72 Scottish MPs, the SNP would have 39 and Labour just 14. The SNP leader, Alex Salmond, was very pleased with his party's success.
Well, obviously I'm delighted. I hope this is the shape of things to come next Thursday. A result like this, of course, would give Scotland a mandate to negotiate our independence from Westminster and to build a new nation within the European community on an equal basis with other nations. So if this is a sign of what's going to happen next week, then I'm very, very pleased indeed. It's a great result for Scotland.
Well, Christine Talbot's in the north of England. In fact, she's in Manchester, and she should be able to talk to us now.
Labour count on this area to bring them many of their votes. And in the real election, this looks unlikely to change. The Newsround results also confirm the north as a Labour stronghold. A third of the region's voters, 34%, chose Labour. The Conservatives were second, followed by the Lib Dems and the Greens. It means Labour would send twice as many MPs to Parliament as the Conservatives from this area. Although 1 in 10 people voted for the Green Party, they could only count on a few seats at Westminster.
Now, what happened in the Midlands? Terry Badu's there to tell us.
Traditionally, the East and West Midlands, here in the industrial heartland of Britain, are the scene of some of the closest battles of the general election, with voting shared between Labour and the Conservatives. But how did the children of the region vote in our election? The Newsround poll also produced a close fight, with Labour and the Conservatives sharing roughly a third of the votes each. However, the Liberal Democrats were not far behind. Nevertheless, despite the even share of votes, Labour emerged as the clear winners in terms of seats won, taking 49, with Conservative in second place with 40, and the Lib Dems in third place with 24.
Is it a similar pattern in the southeast? Nick Gardner should be able to tell us.
The southeast of England is one of the richest parts of the country. It's usually a Conservative stronghold, where the other parties struggle to take seats. Our results keep the area in Conservative hands, but they don't have quite such a firm grip on the region. The Liberals take over a quarter of the vote, Labour nearly a fifth. Their huge share of the vote would send 63 Conservative MPs to Parliament. The Liberals also do well with 27, and Labour pick up 13 seats.
And for the last of our regional roundups, Stuart Maisner is in London.
The Labour Party have won in London, but not by much. At the last real election, the Conservative Party took some 3/4 of the vote. So from our results, Labour can say they've got some revenge. Over a third of London's voters, 35%, chose Labour. The Conservatives were pushed into second place, with the Liberal Democrats and Greens trailing behind. There are 84 MPs in London. Our results would mean 43 of them would be Labour, 28 Conservative, with only a handful for the other parties.
Well, a lot of very interesting results there. Perhaps one of the most significant, though, was the vote in Scotland, where the Scottish National Party have taken control. Now, that would mean, if it was the real thing, that they would be allowed to negotiate Scotland's independence. Angela Rumbold, isn't this a clear signal from the young people of Scotland that they want Scotland to form its own nation?
Well, it might be taken as that, but I must say I do think that the Scottish people as a whole would want to think very carefully indeed before breaking away from the Union. As you know, the Conservative Party does not believe that that should be part of the future for Scotland. We do believe that as a union under the United Kingdom, we should all remain together, and I feel very strongly that that's what the adult population might be thinking about more carefully, particularly if they've seen what the children are thinking.
But they've rejected the policies of both the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party as well, haven't they?
Well, I think that what's happened here is partly the fault of the Conservatives, because they've run Scotland with hardly any members of Parliament, refused to listen to what the Scots are saying. The Scots inevitably start thinking to themselves, well, maybe the only way to get justice is to go all the way to independence. I hope they will listen to what Liberal Democrats are saying and realise that they can have more power but stay within the United Kingdom.
Tony Blair, if we look at the regional results throughout the United Kingdom, the Labour Party generally seems weaker in the south of England. What are you going to do about that?
I think the results in London are actually pretty good. But I think that our support is actually very strong right across the country. And that's because I think many young people particularly know how difficult things are getting a job. And down south, people have had greater difficulty doing this than anywhere else. And I think it's also that Labour has been able to put forward the idea that the various regions and indeed countries, like Scotland, should have much more control over their own affairs. And you can achieve that without separating out nations, which I think would be a disaster for everyone.
Angela Rumbold, it's almost the reverse for the Conservative Party. The further north you get, the worse the Conservative Party do.
It's interesting, isn't it? And yet, in the north, a great deal of resources, a great deal of effort has gone on to ensure regeneration. Tremendous amount of money was put in, particularly in the 80s, into the north to ensure regeneration, to such an extent that it is perfectly true to say that the effects of the recession have not bitten quite as hard within the north, and the northern areas, and Scotland in particular, as they have done in the south. And yet, down in the south, reality still prevails, and they still prefer Conservatives.
Des Wilson, as we've already heard, the Liberal Democrats hold the balance of power in this Parliament that we're seeing. Are you going to go into partnership with either of the other two parties?
Well, our position is that the voters have said that they don't want to give power to either of those parties. They've indicated that they want power shared. Now, we are ready and willing to form a stable, progressive a government with majority support if one of the other parties wishes to do so. Of course, if they want to ignore the vote and just set up a government and plough on, then there's nothing we can do, but I don't think the voters will like it.
You're not just blackmailing the other two parties?
No, our position is that we are available and ready to talk sense with anyone who respects the verdict of the voters.
Well, I think the real problem with this is that you could end up with the Liberal Democrats deciding either a Conservative government or a Labour government. And I think that the vast majority of people believe that type of horse trading, that type of dealing is wrong. You should stand on your programme and your platform.
Jean Lambert, very quickly, which party would the Green Party throw their support behind in the event of a result like this?
We're not throwing our support behind any particular party. We're looking at their programme. We want the most radical changes, those which are actually going to take us towards a much more sustainable future. And I'm thrilled that so many of the young people taking part in this election have seen that and have rejected the old forms of government and have said, no, they want more cooperative ways of working. They want real debate about the issues, a parliament that thinks.
We shall see what happens next week, but thank you all very much for joining us.
And finally, for a look at what your votes would do to the political map of Britain, here's Peter Snow once again in the election night studio. Peter.
Juliet, it would be the most extraordinary political geography of the country that we've seen for a very, very, very long time indeed. Here is the 1987 election result. Look how blue the country is. There's Mrs. Thatcher with her majority of 100, completely dominating the south, London, the Midlands, and much of the north as well. Just a few Labour MPs up here. Scotland dominated on the whole in the Highlands by the Liberal Democrats and by Labour in the central lowlands here. Now, look what you would have done to the map in 1992. Here's the extraordinary patchwork of political colour. Starting in Scotland, look at the Scottish National Party's colour dominating Scotland. The majority of Scotland's MPs will be Scottish National Party. Look how many greens there are in the rest of the country. Look how much the blue swathe that was painted all over the south of England has been blotched by a number of other colours here, including, of course, mainly Liberal Democrats who are completely dominating the southwest. An extraordinary political complexion to the country. And indeed, it probably would be some time. All the comings and goings and Downing Street, the negotiations would go on, coalition talk would go on. It might be some days, even weeks, before we knew who really had the key to number 10. But probably the man with the best chance of forming a government would be Neil Kinnock. He'd still be short by 90 of an overall majority, but he'd have a chance if he formed a coalition with the Liberal Democrats.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's just about it for this Newsround election special, and a lot of fun it's been. Alongside the winners from the main parties, we've had the Monster Raving Loonies, who won an incredible 13 seats, the Billy Lightning Wallpaper Party, and even a house party. From Newsround election special, from Krishnan and me, bye-bye.